Peter Bergman has such an interesting career, and he's got a really interesting book that we're going to talk about, Small Ironies. You can get it on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, wherever great books are sold. So he joins us here on Author's Corner on America Tonight with me, Kate Delaney. Peter, thanks for coming on.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
So, of course, I set you up with this incredible background. Let's talk about the things that you have written about in the past when it comes to theater, etc.
Well, I've been a theater critic since the age of 14, which is a little unusual, I think. But it's nice to get paid for your work, and they've been paying me ever since. I've reviewed a lot of shows in New York on Broadway and off Broadway. And the last 20 years, I've been basically concentrating on regional theater out of the Berkshires in Western Massachusetts.
What was it that got you hooked when you were 14? Was it a Broadway show you saw, or just the excitement of it, or off Broadway, or what pulled you in?
It was a Broadway show called A Taste of Honey, a British play. The plot was fascinating. The acting was incredible, and Angela Lansbury was playing the mother. I think it was her first Broadway show. And I was so taken with the performances that I wrote about the play and sent a review into a local newspaper, just thinking they might print it. The next thing I knew, they not only printed it, but sent me a check for $25. I was hooked.
Wow. And so, having seen all the things that you've seen theater wise, the transitions, all of that, do you think, and this is really a tough question, I don't know if you can really even answer it, but in some ways, has theater improved, or do you long for some of what you've seen in the past?
I miss some of the past, but I do think that what's happening now is kind of fascinating because things are changing drastically. Musicals are becoming more pop music involved and less theater composed. The songs are more general than they used to be. There are about 5 or 6 shows playing now on Broadway that, to me, sound very much alike. They don't have the distinct and unique sounds of their composers, which up until maybe 8 years ago, they all did.
Well, and it's interesting too, because as you see it from the critic side, and then you look at some of the theaters, big and small, and getting the funding, getting it made. I think a lot of people probably listening to us across the country, some understand that and some don't, but in a different way, there are some similarities to the movie business where you have to get someone to write the check, right?
It's true.
Yeah, and that makes it tougher. It does. But I think it's fascinating. And I love that you lived your passion, really. I mean, would you say that's fair to say?
I would. I've been involved in the theater since I was 4 years old when I made my debut in a national tour of Kurt Weill's musical Street Scene. My grandfather was in the show playing the grandfather, and they were looking for 3 kids to open the second act. And he said, my grandson can do it. And so I did.
Wow. Do you
So I've
remember
been
that
hooked a
moment?
long time.
Yeah. Do you remember that moment? You had to have little nerves, maybe no nerves.
I think I had no nerves at the age of 4. I just got out there and did it. I had a lengthy solo in the song that opened the second act, and it was funny, and I thought it was funny, and it was just a delight to do and a delight to perform, and I love getting the applause. Applause is very contagious, by the way. Once it starts, you can't ever get rid of it. It's in your body. It's in your mind.
Wow. Well said. So now we turn to the paperback that you have out, Small Ironies. What was it that led you, which by the way, you can get hardcover, paperback, or Kindle, any way you want to absorb the story, you can do that. But what made you write this novel? What drew you to writing this story?
I had this strange idea about doing a book on prostitution. It was originally going to be a nonfiction book. I was in San Francisco, and a friend of mine there introduced me to a woman who was a prostitute who was going to law school. Her concept was to get her law degree and to work on creating a union for prostitutes so that prostitutes could get corporate and multiple health care insurance. And I thought, what a great idea. And that changed me from writing a nonfiction piece into writing a novel in which that would be the goal.
And it's interesting because, as you said, meeting this prostitute and what her life was like, it's not what most people visualize, right?
No, it's not.
Right, because we have ideas in our mind of what that means, and even how it's been portrayed on the screen in movies, and then maybe in real life for some as well. Small Ironies, the title, great. And you talk about the main character is Max Draper. Tell us about Max Draper and what his life is like.
Max is the younger son in a family of basically four. His mother is a former prostitute. His father, who was a hotel manager, has become essentially her manager, her pimp. And the fifth person in the family is his grandmother, his mother's mother, who was a streetwalker and a prostitute in the 1920s and 30s. And she's a wonderful character, Grandma Elaine. Everybody who's read the book adores this character. In fact, when I first published it as a weekly publication on my website, the readership grew and grew and grew. And when she died, I got hate mail because people loved the character so much.
Then you were onto something, that's for sure. What's interesting too about this book, 52 chapters, and you cover a period, a span of what is it, 17 years?
About 17 years, yes.
And did you do that to really take us through the arc of the character and to take us into different locations?
Principally, I mean, Max is an interesting character. He is the son of this prostitute family. And unlike his sister, who goes into the business, he has a peculiar reluctance to get involved, but he does get involved because it's in his nature and it's in his family's history. And the arc of his journey through life from a child to an adult is fascinating, I think. Certainly fascinated me when I was writing it. He grows, he changes, he tries to live the life that his parents would prefer for him. It works and it doesn't work. It becomes an impetus for his choices in life. And what his choices ultimately lead him to is that going to law school and creating that union.
Yeah, so it's interesting. And the title of the book, is that why the title of the book? It kind of dovetails back to what you're actually describing, Small Ironies.
It does. Each chapter opens with a quote from one of five different publications, including the Reader's Digest from April of 1946, which is when the book basically begins. And in it are these tiny little stories, these little one paragraph stories that are ironic, that are strange, small ironies that affect the life of one or two people. And that's where the title came from.
And so for in reading it, I think that I call it Easter eggs, which you're familiar with that. You planted some Easter eggs, didn't you?
I did.
Was it fun to do it that way?
I found it great fun and very inspiring.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Now, does this make you want to, because obviously you're a writer, but does this make you want to dive more into writing novels?
I have written other novels. I have a second novel that was published a couple of years ago called Cement Dust, which dealt with a totally different kind of topic. It dealt with the confluence of creativity and bipolarism.
Wow. And in doing that, which is very different from Small Ironies, was it was it more of a joy or a release of a different sort to pull together Small Ironies and write that story, because they're two very different types of stories?
Small Ironies was written very specifically to emulate the manner in which Charles Dickens wrote his novels. He basically published most of his books in newspapers, one chapter at a time, one chapter a week. And I did the same thing with Small Ironies. With Cement Dust, it was totally different. The impetus was different, the format was different, and it was a bigger challenge, I think, to write Cement Dust because I knew where I wanted to go with it. And like so many authors of fiction, I found myself fighting my characters.
Wow. I can almost picture that in your head going back and forth from one shoulder to the other. When people read Small Ironies, what do you hope they take away?
I hope they take away an understanding of the oldest profession and the people who get involved in it, that it's not a horror. It's not an imposed, um, disastrous kind of lifestyle. What it is a lifestyle that can provide security and can provide all sorts of things, but that isn't appreciated or accepted by so many people, including people in the father's family, who think this is all quite terrible. But it's really not. They're a very normal American family. They're just involved in a profession that's a little out there.
And that goes back to the meeting that you had with the prostitute who you were just in just hearing the story of what was happening in her life had to have changed your point of view, which then led to you eventually writing this novel.
It did exactly that.
Wow, powerful. Small Ironies, you can get it on Amazon, Barnes& Noble, wherever great books are sold. Peter, thank you so much.
You're quite welcome, Kate. Thank you for having me.
Visit us at www.greatwritersmedia.com. Email us at info@greatwritersmedia.com or call us at +1 877 556 0487.